Good afternoon. This is the Rules and Executive Nominations Committee, and we have a little bit of business to do today. We're going to have a vote on the recess appointments for 2025. We're going to do some re-referrals, and then we're going to start the public hearing on 8 bills. So I think you all have the agenda. I'm going to start with the gubernatorial appointments to statewide boards that are the purview of the Rules and Executive Nominations Committee. The Vice Chair will make the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move on the following 2025 recess appointments as follows. For the Caroline County Board of License Commissioners, Glenn Elmer Pluchak. For the Chesapeake College Board of Trustees, Adeline Campbell Eckert. Also for the Chesapeake College Board of Trustees, Eric Osterhott. Also for the Chesapeake College Board of Trustees, Shelley M. Gross Wade. And for the Land Reclamation Committee, Madam Chair, I move for reappointment of Ivy Lynn Opal. Move those reappointments, Madam Chair.
It's been properly moved and seconded. It's been properly moved. Seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it. Those are approved. The next order of business is a short list of re-referrals. The Vice Chair will make the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the following bills be re-referred to the appropriate committee. Those bills would be HB 1489, HB 1493, HB 1494, HB 1495, HB 1496, HB 1499, HB 1502, HB 1508, HB 1510, HB 1511, HB 1513, HB 1515, HB 1519, HB 1521, HB 1523, HB 1524, HB 1525, HB 1527, HB 1534, HB 1538, HB 1541, and HB 1533. I move that these bills be referred to the appropriate committee, Madam Chair.
The motion has been made.
Second.
And seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Those bills will be re-referred to the appropriate committees. And yes, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Is there a list, or did we receive a list of those bills? No, not the
No,
re-refer.
we just got it this morning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That list we just read off.
Yes.
I'll get it to you later.
Can you get it to everyone?
Yes, it'll be published when it's time, in the proper time. Okay, next we move on to the bill hearings. We're going to start the agenda as has been published in the order published. We'll start with House Bill 295, Delegate Fisher. And if you have a panel, please bring them up.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. Before you is House Bill 925. For the record, Delegate Mark Fisher, Calvert County. The bill is titled Amendments Convention, called under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, Delegation to the Convention. The bill requires, in the next regular session of the General Assembly, following the fulfillment of the required number of states invoking Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to convene an amendments convention, that the General Assembly appoint a delegation to the convention and an advisory committee. The bill establishes requirements and responsibilities for commissioners to the delegation, in addition to establishing the composition and responsibility of the advisory commission. Again, the bill is conditioned upon such a convention ultimately being called. And we have two individuals here to talk about Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution and the process and the purpose of the bill. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Please, you have 2 minutes.
It says don't touch, so I'm assuming don't touch anything. Just making sure. All right, good afternoon. I'm Steve Patton, a resident of District 42C here in Maryland. I'd like to begin by clarifying what HB 925 is not, and this is important. This bill is not an Article 5 resolution, nor is it tied to any specific Article 5 resolution. That is, this legislation does not add Maryland to any of the growing lists of states calling for an Article 5 Convention of States. It is not that. So what is HB 925? It is legislation that establishes a framework for Maryland's participation in an Article 5 convention once the 34-state threshold is attained. This legislation ensures our state is prepared, our commissioners are properly guided, and accountability mechanisms are in place. This bill provides clear, stringent guidelines for Maryland's commissioners who will represent our state, holding them to the highest standards, outlining their responsibilities, and including a removal process if they deviate from the rules you all set. Whether or not this body ever passes a resolution calling for an Article 5 convention, Maryland will participate when one is called. The General Assembly will be responsible for selecting and instructing the commissioners that will represent Maryland. I think you all would agree it would be inefficient and be reactive as opposed to prepared when an Article 5 convention resolution meets the 34-state threshold and an amendments convention is called. Rest assured, an Article 5 Convention of States is coming. It's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. My colleague who will speak after me will address the exact number of states of resolutions that are passing across the country for an Article 5 convention. In closing, this bill is about responsible governance, accountability, and ensuring Maryland is prepared for the future. Thank you so much. I look forward to any questions, and thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. Next is Seth Lipko.
Yes, ma'am. All right, yeah, I would like to share why I support HB 925. I just want to remind everybody this bill is, once again, not an application to any particular effort to call an Article 5 convention, although there are over 50 unique efforts across the country to do so. There was an analysis performed by the Phoenix Correspondence Commission, and they revealed the two closest efforts to reaching that 34-state threshold, and those are the Balanced Budget Amendment and the Convention of States Project. They have 27 and 19 state applications, respectively. So an Article 5 convention could happen imminently. So what this bill does is it defines the rules that Maryland will follow should any of those 50-plus efforts reach that threshold. This applies to all of them. And here's a quick summary of what this bill contains. So it first creates a bicameral oversight committee within the General Assembly, and it grants them the power to select their commissioners and recall anyone who violates their duties. This really enables you to choose members of Maryland's delegation to represent the diversity of our state. It also defines a number of commissioners, what their qualifications are, then that prevents any special interest influence during a convention. It establishes an oath for those commissioners that will legally bind them to serve the state's interest. It outlines their roles, responsibilities, and instructions at a convention so that they're prepared. It limits gift contributions to those commissioners to prevent any corruption. And it ensures that commissioners adhere to the subject matter of the convention, which prevents any concerns of a runaway occurring. And also it does explicitly protect the civil rights amendments in our Constitution from any alteration. So we should have these guidelines in place. As Steve mentioned, Maryland's not required to have an active application to a convention to participate in one. And it's prudent to do this now. I see this growing tension between federal and state government that could accelerate these applications even quicker. So I urge you to pass this while we have the time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee for any of the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 925. We'll move on to House Bill 927. Delegate Pena-Melnick is the sponsor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to present to you House Bill 927. House Bill 927 requires that if a bill as introduced or amended, reduces health and community support services funded by the Maryland Department of Health, that the fiscal and policy note for the bill must include the following: an estimate of the number of individuals who will lose services as a result of the reduction, aggregated by jurisdiction, an assessment of the impact of the loss of services on the health and well-being of the individuals and the families, an evaluation of the financial impact of health care and social services costs to the state as a result of the reduction in services. The idea for the bill was prompted by the drastic proposed budget cuts to the DDA community this year. Although the Appropriations Committee was eventually, and the Budget and Tax Committee were able to restore the cuts, they're working on it, we should be forward-thinking and analyzing the overall impact of the reduction in services to the health, well-being, and finances of individuals who are receiving health and community support waiver services in our state. House Bill 927 has a fiscal note of $361,000. However, I believe that the bill can be amended to reduce the impact. The fiscal note states that health and community support services are undefined, and I intend to clarify that the bill applies to health and community support waiver services, such as DDA's family support waiver, community support waiver, and community pathway waiver, and for those individuals receiving self-directed DDA services. These are people in our states that they're the most vulnerable, and they need our help. House Bill 927 will ensure that this policy, these facts are taken into consideration when we're making these decisions. I intend to work with the note writer and DLS to reduce that fiscal note and to narrow down the definition. So I ask that you give it a favorable report, and I will keep the committee actually informed as I make those. I did make the amendment request already to redefine it and to narrow it. This is important. They're the most vulnerable, and we need to know what we're voting for. How is it going to impact them? Thank you so much for your consideration. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any questions for the sponsor? If not, we'll call up the first group. Is there a panel? Robin Elliott, Evelyn Burton, and Fatima Wahid.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Robin Elliott, and I know many of you. I work with for many healthcare organizations, and my firm is Public Policy Partners. You have testimony from many of our firm's clients, actually 16 of them, in strong support of this bill. Just a little bit of background about myself. I got my start in legislative work as a DLS budget analyst, analyzing the health budget. And in that capacity, I also assisted with many, many fiscal notes. I think this bill is a very reasonable approach. There are not many bills that actually reduce services. Most bills are about increasing access to services. So I actually think the fiscal note is much narrower. And I think as DLS has evolved its fiscal and policy notes over time, they already capture much of this information. So what this bill does is basically ensure that you all have the information that you need when bills come out that reduce funding for health services, and let's face it, that's probably mostly the budget or the BRFA, to make sure you have all the information you need in order to make those decisions. DLS has access to much of this information already through their work with the agencies as well as other experts. And so this just asks to put all that information in one place in the fiscal and policy note. And with that, we would ask for a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Fatima Wahid?
It's Hussein Wahid,
Okay, I'm sorry.
registered,
It was
yes.
just what I saw here. Thank you.
Yep. The bills and the proposals we have are with the Advanced Engineering Research Centers, University of Maryland. They pertain to the implementation, the interactive part of specifications and standards, and do not cost anything because they have proven the effectiveness over a very long period of time, and they deliver transformative economic efficiency. And whenever there's a potential for reduction in services, these methodologies can be applied, and they all generate transformative economic efficiency, which brings about big changes with respect to the reduction in services for communities and for health impacts, because they do not require any additional resources. So that is the key. And this is part of the initiative that was undertaken with the HB 99 bill for innovation and best practices experts network, but the committee, the work group did not meet because it was a governor's work group, and that is the reason why the proposals have not gone any further with respect to implementation. So the recommendation is that we include the valuable aspect of these proposals that can become pilot projects, guidelines, and also the bills that will deliver the economic efficiency immediately without any costs or any additional service requirements or additional time requirements. The way they are structured, they work along with what is undertaken as the services that are available. So they are extremely useful in times where reductions have to be implemented.
Thank you so much for your testimony. We have one virtual witness. Is Evelyn Burton on? She is not present. So are there any questions for this panel, for any of the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 927. Please turn to House Joint Resolution 6. Delegate Williams.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Healy, Vice Chair Holmes, and members of the Rules Committee. I'm Delegate Nicole Williams from District 22, testifying in favor of House Joint Resolution Number 6, also known as the use of nuclear weapons. The purpose of this resolution is to reduce the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons within the United States and ultimately around the world. If we pass this resolution here at the Maryland General Assembly, we will be joining 7 other state legislative bodies and 75 other municipalities and counties in support of this measure. In the world, there are over 13,000 nuclear weapons, a majority of which are in the possession of the United States and Russia. Being that the United States own a large portion of the nuclear weapons worldwide, we as Americans have the power to create the difference in the usage of the possibility of nuclear weapons everywhere. We strongly urge the President of the United States, the members of the United States Senate, to endorse the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that will prohibit any form of nuclear activity. This treaty has already been ratified in 73 nations across the world, and the United States can and should join many other countries in working towards a safer world for all. And for those reasons, I urge this committee to give a favorable report on House Joint Resolution Number 6.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Are there any questions for the sponsor? If not, we'll move to the panel. We have Arthur Milholland, Darrell Carrington, Terrence Fitzgerald, and Gwen Du Bois.
believe that Arthur Milholland and Gwen DuBois are remote, correct?
I'm sorry, yes, those are remote. So in person, we have Darrell Carrington and,
Fitzgerald.
let's see, Terrence Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, or sorry, good afternoon, members of the committee. My name, for the record, is Darrell Carrington, Carrington Associates, LLC. We don't typically testify on bills for our clients, but this one is really important. This is not going to be a profile and courage moment for you all, because we've already passed this, and the advocates have done the job I asked them to, which is you have to build support for your measures for the General Assembly. So you have to go around the state, and you have to build support for this. And you have to get your delegates to be on board. You have to go and talk to your senators. And the advocates have done that over the past several years. They have literally been pounding the pavement. They've been at events. They have their members in your respective jurisdictions reach out to you directly. So they have done the job that they were supposed to do. And they have built, we believe, the significant support that one needs. And when I say this isn't like a moment you have to be profiles and courage, because we've already passed this in Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Frederick, Delegate Pepe. We've passed it in Prince George's and in Moco in Montgomery County. So really, I mean, the majority of this committee, you guys, your constituents have already said, we want this. This isn't a moment in which you have to really think about it much. You can just go ahead and do this. And someone also said, well, we don't normally send love letters to Congress. Well, you know what? Maybe this is the right time to send a love letter. Let's have a little bit of love. And to that end, before I conclude my remarks, I like to, for some of you who know this, my wife and I lost a child. So we know what the speaker is going through, and our hearts, our thoughts, and the like are with her and her family during this incredible, difficult time. And it just never ends. And so our hearts and thoughts are with her. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, next, Terrence Fitzgerald.
Chair Healy and members of the committee, I'm Dr. Terry Fitzgerald, a physician, a member of Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility, and a grandfather. I urge you to approve HJ 6, a resolution that calls on the federal government to take certain actions to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Last week, I turned 76 years old. When my youngest grandchild turns that age, it will be 2099, on the verge of the 22nd century. Statistically, even if there is only a very small risk of nuclear war each year, we are almost certain to suffer that catastrophe by then, unless we take steps now to reduce that risk. Years ago, when we spoke with Senator Mac Mathias about nuclear war, he noted how terrible it would be, and then commented that at least there would be a flash and it would be over. We explained to him that it is much more complicated than that. Now, these years later, we know how much more complicated it really is. After the immediate awful effects of detonation of a single nuclear bomb, the tremendous fireball, the incineration of everything nearby that can burn or melt, the literal vaporization of humans, the devastating winds which turn every bit of debris into missiles which can tear up the flesh of any living thing in the path. After all that, there will be darkness and stillness. But that is just the beginning. As described in Annie Jacobson's detailed and well-documented recent book, Nuclear War, a Scenario, global thermonuclear war might last just 72 minutes. Hundreds of millions are already dead, but more will die soon from radiation, fires, toxic chemicals in the air, and other causes. But the resulting nuclear winter could result in 5 billion deaths over the next 24 months. Civilization would be gone. As an emergency physician, I can tell you this. There is no treatment for a disaster like this, only prevention. We must prevent what we cannot cure. Please give a favorable report on HJ 6. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We have virtual witness Arthur Milholland. I believe you're on the screen now.
You're muted. Art, you're muted.
You're on mute, Mr. Mulholland.
Sorry, there we go. Can you hear me now? Great, thank you. So for years, pilots and engineers warned about the Key Bridge being vulnerable and needing protection upgrade. Those warnings were ignored. For years, Reagan Airport had warnings and many close calls. Warnings were ignored there too. And for 80 years, at least, Einstein, Daniel Ellsberg, Secretary of Defense William Perry, and many others have warned of the dangers of nuclear weapons. And there have been many close calls. Warnings now have been pretty much ignored. Virtually all the guardrail treaties protecting us have been removed. Well, in the State of the State address, Governor Moore exclaimed, "Where there is a crisis, Maryland faces it." With the doomsday clock at 89 seconds, we have a nuclear crisis that must be faced. Unable to protect Marylanders, the state should try to prevent nuclear war by speaking out with use of nuclear weapons resolutions SJ4 and HJ6, and thus support efforts at the federal level to reduce nuclear war risk and ultimately abolish the weapons. Silence is not acceptable. To paraphrase poet Dylan Thomas, we should not go gentle into that nuclear night, but rage against the dying of human light. Accordingly, I too ask for a favorable report on HJ6, and thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have a virtual witness, Gwen Dubois.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Healy and committee members. My deepest condolences to Speaker Jones. As a parent, I cannot even imagine the pain. Okay, so my name is Dr. Gwen Du Bois. I'm speaking from the UN right now. The meeting of parties to the treaty is going on, the treaty on the nuclear ban. Please see my written testimony reviewing evidence from worldwide medical journals, a journal founded by atomic bomb scientists, and the Nobel Prize Committee that the risk of nuclear war is growing. And then in a New York Times series, Back from the Brink, the editor warned that we must not wait until the next crisis comes, because then it might be too late to try to exert our influence. In my minute left, I want to answer the why legislators should have a role in trying to prevent nuclear war. The answer is we need your help in taking our urgent plea to the federal government in a way that Marylanders cannot. Our federally elected officials here from the corporations, our federally elected officials here from the corporations building these omnicidal weapons, these omnicidal nuclear weapons, but not from the people, the children, the grandchildren, who cannot speak, and they would be snuffed out. In the 90s, we helped pass nuclear-free zones, and mayors across the state joined Mayors for Peace that was founded by Hiroshima and Nagasaki mayors. Since 2018, we've passed Back from Brink resolutions, if you heard, Baltimore City, Frederick City, and Prince George's and Montgomery County. We're not alone with this resolution. 8 state legislative chambers and 80 towns and cities and counties across the country have passed it. We are part of a growing national network, just like the women who secured the right to vote in the last century. The victories were state by state until it became a national mandate. But we don't have to pass a constitutional amendment. We just need federal leaders to realize what more and more voters understand. The policies from the last century no longer make sense. And that was cyber attacks, AI, and the spread of false information that can go viral in minutes. The people want 5 simple commonplace changes to address the world of today. This resolution will cost the state nothing. But if what we do here helps encourage legislators in other states, and if at last there's a new look at dangerous, outdated policies, then we can celebrate Maryland's role in helping reduce the risk of nuclear war. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Okay, we have one more virtual witness, James Wagner.
Yes. Good day, Chair Healy and committee. Yeah, and I also am very saddened by the loss of Speaker Jones's son, and I send my condolences along. I'm James Wagner. I live in Frederick, Maryland. It's actually Frederick City who passed a local Back from the Brink resolution. I am going to focus on why this is a local issue at the city and county level, also state. So there's substantial precedent for local action in a sphere of activity that ostensibly would seem to be federal. So actually my colleague Gwen Du Bois, who just spoke, reminded me that, and we had here the first bill, HB 0925, I believe was the number, 75 maybe, regarding preparing for an Article 5 effort in our state. So actually it was the women's right to vote was Gwen's example on that. So there's a precedent there. Also, we have our renewable portfolio standard, of course, where the federal government is not leading. We also have our minimum wage here in Maryland, and we have environmental rules, regulations, permits that are the purview of the state, even over federal facilities. So for those who say, what is the state doing getting involved in this? There is substantial precedent. So although there is some enlightened activity in Congress, there's not much. Dr. Milholland referred to the collaboration that we could be involved in that. So I will close and just say that this is a local issue. The feds aren't acting. The state has a right to protect its citizens. We ask with all of our heart for you all to take the lead now for your citizens and get this through. This is the second year. We need it to go. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee for any of the witnesses? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Joint Resolution 6.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please turn to House Joint Resolution 5. Delegate Fair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if any of our advocates on this
Bring your panel
bill.
up if you have them here.
Yeah,
Thank you.
anyone who is testifying in support, feel free to come up. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. May I begin? I'm so sorry. May I begin, Madam Chair? Thank you. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Rules Committee, Delegate Chris Fair here presenting House Joint Resolution 5. This bill is simply about one thing. This joint resolution is about one thing and one thing only, and it's reaffirming Maryland's commitment to supporting and teaching and educating our society on individualized, marginalized groups around our state. We know from countless studies, including a recent one that was done at Princeton University, that the expansion of education to make sure that we're including a culturally diverse educational background has multiple benefits to the education of all students, not just those marginalized groups. But it does help marginalized groups see themselves through their education and learn their collective history, as well as their collective civic responsibilities. It helps to decrease biases, it helps to enhance critical thinking, and enhances problem solving for all students when they learn about the broad and diverse community of which they grow up around. During a debate last year, during an interesting discussion, it was mentioned, and so I want to reiterate, no one is ever harmed from learning that their world is bigger than the immediate circle that's around them. No one is ever harmed from learning that people are diverse and that our communities are bigger than necessarily what we see right in front of our face. And so it is important for us to make sure that we are acknowledging that and teaching that, and that's what this House Joint Resolution seeks to accomplish. A few folks have asked why this bill has come forward, and I want to explain my reasoning before we turn it over to the panel. Sitting on the House Ways and Means Committee and the Education Subcommittee, every year we hear numerous advocates come down and explain to us why we need to pass curriculum-specific mandates that work on this exact issue. We hear from the AAPI community. We hear from the Latino and Latina community. We hear from the LGBTQ+ community. We hear from the Black and African American community. We hear time and time again that we need to be mandating curriculum. And we know that that is not the proper process for the Maryland General Assembly to follow, that we do not dictate curriculum down to the local levels unless we're talking about personal student safety. And so what we're looking at here is how do we kind of thread the needle to make sure that we make it clear that the Maryland General Assembly values a culturally diverse
educational system that is open to everybody. And this seems like an appropriate mechanism and kind of vehicle to carry that message forward, that we do value and encourage a culturally diverse curriculum while still allowing our local education agencies to then identify what that culturally diverse curriculum looks like while making suggestions about areas and biases that we need to be looking at as a society to better address that. With that, I encourage this committee to pass House Joint Resolution 5 with a favorable report, and I look forward to passing this over to our proponents of this joint resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any questions for the sponsor? If not, we'll go to the panel. Lauren Lamb, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Lamb. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland State Education Association, which represents 75,000 public school educators across the state. MSEA supports this resolution's affirmation that all students deserve an education that accurately reflects history, including the experiences and contributions of groups that have experienced discrimination. When students grapple honestly with history, they are better prepared to understand the roots of real-world issues and work toward a better future. A historically accurate education teaches students to think critically about the world around them and learn from the past. And a multicultural education helps students develop awareness, understanding, and respect for all. It is our hope that this resolution will prompt a holistic review to evaluate and update state curriculum standards with the input of educators, families, and members of underrepresented communities. We unequivocally believe that diversity makes us stronger, and we urge the committee to issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Next, Nicole Hollywood.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Nicole Hollywood. I'm a professor at one of Maryland's illustrious HBCUs, and my research area is diversity in organizations and education. This testimony is being submitted today on behalf of PFLAG Salisbury, the Salisbury, Maryland chapter of PFLAG National, and strong support of Joint Resolution 5. A robust curriculum is a mirror and a door that builds knowledge and extends perspective. This means that students need to be able to see themselves in what they're learning as a reflection of themselves and their histories, and also must be encouraged to see outwards and consider perspectives and experiences different from their own. Students bring a wealth of assets, cultural reference, and experiences into the classroom. Yet traditionally, the experiences and insights of students from historically marginalized or underrepresented groups aren't thoughtfully considered, contributing to a learning environment that is not inclusive and where biases are allowed to persist. Simply put, diversity in education is important because it fosters a richer learning environment by exposing students to different perspectives, cultures, and backgrounds, which a large body of empirical research shows promotes critical thinking, empathy, tolerance, and prepares students to navigate an increasingly globalized world. It also encourages creativity and innovation by allowing students to consider viewpoints beyond their own, leading to better problem-solving skills and a more inclusive society. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, Ken Phelps, Jr.
Morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Rules Committee. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network. We have a committee of...
Okay, I need to know your name. I'm sorry.
Linda Boyd.
Okay, I called Ken Phelps. Are you?
That's because we had to give a name to get our badges and to register, but we have 8 of us working on the committee. We cover 300 bills.
Okay, I just need it for the record so that I have the right
name
I'm sorry. For the right
Linda
person.
Boyd, B-O-Y-D.
First name, please.
Linda.
Linda? Okay,
Reverend.
Please proceed.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. You've probably heard me say this before, that all children are creations of God and that we all have God in us. And along those lines, it's important to respect every member of God's kingdom. We've heard discussion of good, extremely excellent, favorable testimony already, so I won't repeat that. But what I do want to emphasize is that American history is strong because we have people from many different areas, many different countries. I love our country because we draw on the strengths of all of those people who come in. So American history, unlike, I can't think of another country who's done it, maybe, I don't even think Canada has. We are comprised of everyone from all over the world. That's pretty extraordinary, and I'm really proud of that. And I think that our history needs to reflect that diversity. It isn't that we need to teach their history. We need to teach about the U.S. history and what's going on and how it affects every one of us. Because I don't know about you, but as a mother and grandmother, I have to say that when I raised my children, I wanted them to obviously honor their accomplishments, but also learn from their mistakes. We don't want our children to grow up just in some Pollyanna world where it's just everything's all hunky-dory, and then all of a sudden when you see something go wrong, you think, well, wait a minute, I didn't know about that. Or it's really our duty as the parents here to say, you're right, we need to teach history of all United States. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We have another 2 in person, and then we'll go to the virtual. So I have, again, I'm sorry, Mr. Waheed?
Yes.
You're next.
They're going to,
My name is Hussein Waheed. I'm with the Advanced Technology Acceleration Initiative, University of Maryland, College Park. And we have proven that the interactive implementation specifications and standards methodology delivers transformative economic efficiency and also brings together diverse groups to study, enhance their education, as well as their capabilities at the same time. And it accomplishes all of this without any additional costs or resources because it is self-sustaining and resilient methodology that has been proven by the #1 ranked Advanced Engineering Center at the University of Maryland. It covers the whole life cycle, so it is particularly important in primary and secondary education to see the results of these dynamical systems using the interactive implementation specifications and standards, and also how energy sustenance can be enhanced with respect to the utilization, the research of carbon negative biofuels. The moment this initiative is started, it becomes apparent with respect to how people themselves, citizens, can generate this large-scale economic efficiency on their own, independently. And also the transformative impact of continuous education and health risk minimization that is achieved through the transformation of the approach with respect to how education can be conducted and enhanced by families, individuals, communities, independently, on their own, without any additional expenses from any other sources apart from what they have achieved themselves. And that in itself is huge. We have calculated in just one initiative of over 2 months, $70 million economic efficiency was delivered for up to 2030.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it. Next is Andy Culp, in person, from the Arc of Maryland.
Madam Chair, I do not have Ms. Culp here. I do have a person I believe signed up. Renee Lau.
Let me see if I can find on the witness list. We had Sandy Gold Range. Do we have, no, that's virtual. And
Maryland Safe Haven.
I don't have any others signed up.
With Maryland Safe Haven?
We're going to check, okay? I don't see it on the list, but I'm going to have staff look too.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, they're not signed up for whatever reason, I don't know, but their name is not on the list.
Okay.
If you would like to submit written testimony, we'll certainly consider it along with everyone else's.
That's fine. We're going to move to virtual testimony as well.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we'll move to the virtual testimony. And at the end, after we have the virtual testimony, we can ask any questions, okay? There's only one more witness, Sandy Gold Rains, who is virtual.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Gold Rains, and I'm pleased to be here today as a board member of GLSEN Maryland. We are the state chapter of the leading national organization centered on creating and sustaining inclusive K-12 education of LGBTQ+ students. We urge the committee to give a favorable report on this House resolution, Elementary Secondary Education Curriculum Importance of Diversity. This resolution is especially important during this time when so many in our nation, state, and localities, and then marginalized and minority communities are under great stress from the federal government and from those supporting its actions. Our students, educators, and families would benefit by knowing our state's political leaders and government recognize and affirm that inclusion and diversity is important. Currently, the Trevor Project and others report that our young people's mental health is suffering. Also, our educators need to feel the support from our state government when they feel attacked by those opposing diversity. GLSEN Maryland, through our outreach to educators, have heard some very difficult stories from across the counties, from educators, families, and students. Importantly, these stories are not just from those counties who are lagged behind in inclusive curriculum, but from all counties, including those who have some model curriculums and model practices. One argument by those who oppose inclusive diverse education, our schools need to focus on academic achievements, and those who've already testified, we know that it's true. Research and other studies have shown that students learn best when they feel welcome, valued, included, and supported. School attendance and academic achievements improve with having inclusive education curriculum, materials, and environment. We urge you to give a favorable committee report.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Delegate Pepe, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, just because I read it, so in the bill it said something about a complete education. And I'm just wondering, is it your intent to ensure that it's age appropriate when determining whether a complete education should be presented to, let's say, people in elementary school?
Always. I think that goes back to the local jurisdiction and their education curriculum committee. They sit down together with parents, advocates, teachers, learning professionals. They sit down and they draft the actual age-appropriate curriculum. This does not seek to in any way force the hand of individuals in local jurisdictions about how they draft their curriculum in an age-appropriate manner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, Delegate Pepe, this is a House Joint Resolution. It does not have the force of law. It is an expression of the will of the General Assembly as a resolution, just for your information. Next, that actually concludes the hearing for House Joint Resolution 5, unless there are other questions. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please turn to House Joint Resolution 3, Delegate Ruth.
Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, esteemed members of the Rules and Executive Nominations Committee. I did have 2 panelists sign up to testify. However, we discussed it and we decided to prioritize keeping this hearing short. So I would ask you to look at their written testimony in the packet. That's Reed Mackey from the Child Labor Coalition and Anjali Kochor, Campaign to End U.S. Child Labor. Both of them represent national coalitions working to end child labor, and Anjali is also a Maryland resident. I also wanted to mention that this bill, you have supporting testimony from the Maryland State and District of Columbia AFL-CIO and SEIU Local 500 in your packet, and AFT Maryland is also supporting. They did not get testimony uploaded in time, but they did send that testimony out to members of the committee. So what is this about? On June 2nd, 1924, over 100 years ago, Congress proposed an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would allow the federal government to regulate child labor. This was in the context of some horrific stories and children who were really doing, hazardous jobs or working late at night, long hours. And so Congress had tried to pass a law, the Keating-Owen Act of 1916, to regulate the interstate sale of goods produced by children to end the practice of child labor. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that law unconstitutional in 1918. Their second attempt was to levy a tax on companies employing children, but the Supreme Court found that unconstitutional as well. So if Congress wanted to enact reform, its only avenue left was a constitutional amendment. And so as a result, they passed House Joint Resolution 184, which in order to propose an amendment to the Constitution, it takes 2/3 of Congress. Hard to imagine today 2/3 of Congress agreeing on something. But in this case, 2/3 of both chambers of Congress proposed this amendment, which would give Congress the ability to limit, regulate, and prohibit the labor of persons under 18 years of age. After Congress proposes an amendment, it must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. It very quickly was ratified by 28 states, but it fell 10 short of the 3/4 needed to ratify it, in part due to a campaign of misinformation, and in part because of the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which finally was able to enact some regulations on child labor. And so this amendment has sat since then. Unfortunately, Maryland not only did not ratify it, the Maryland General Assembly voted against ratification. So the Maryland General Assembly is on the record as voting against regulating child labor. And so it seemed like the matter was settled until the last few years, when we've seen an increase in child labor violations, including children as young as 13 working in meat packing plants. No, this is not a Dickensian story. This actually happened. Cleaning the sharp blades of the machines, using hazardous chemicals, children in multiple places working long hours. And in addition to these child labor violations, there have been at least 10 states in the last, since 2021, that have rolled back child labor protections. Most of these either extended the work hours allowed, which has an impact on a child's ability to get a good education when they're working long hours at night, and some of them lifted restrictions on hazardous work. So there has been, in the last few years, an interest in reviving this amendment and getting the additional states. There is no time limit placed on this amendment, so it is still valid. We just need 10 additional states to ratify it. It has been introduced since 2018. It's been introduced in a number of states, including Connecticut, where it passed the House in last year. It passed the House in Connecticut last year, and Hawaii, where it's passed the Senate twice. Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, and Nebraska. And so and just to address the issue of the current Congress, we know that the current Congress is probably not, even if this were to become an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the current Congress would not take advantage of that likely and pass any kind of regulations. But it's going to take several years at least to get the 10 the 10 additional states. Even if Maryland were to pass it this year, and Connecticut, which has also introduced it again, pass it this year, we still would need 8 additional states. So by the time it would become an amendment to the Constitution, the hope is that we would have a Congress that is willing to act on this and to prevent hazardous and harmful child labor. And so it's time for the Maryland General Assembly to correct the mistakes of our predecessors, a century after Congress first proposed this constitutional amendment, and finally ratify the child labor amendment. And so I ask for a favorable report for HJ3.
Are there any questions for the sponsor of this legislation? I actually do have one question. You referenced young children that happened recently with meat packing plants. Was that legal where that happened?
It was not. It was not legal, and the Department of Labor did the National Department of Labor did file an action against that company. I believe that is still up in the air right now as to what's actually happening with that. But when you look at these violations in conjunction with the weakening of child labor laws around the country, there is clearly a push to greater employment of children in hazardous occupations and harmful work.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the hearing on House Joint Resolution 3. Please take House Joint Resolution 1. Delegate Chi.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and esteemed members. I am Delegate Lily Chi, here to present House Joint Resolution 1. This joint resolution would urge the United States Congress to enact federal legislation to establish a national infrastructure bank. About a year ago, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed in a matter of seconds. The image was seen around the world and served as a dire reminder of America's fragile and outdated infrastructure that can no longer keep up with our needs for the 21st century commerce and our quality of life. Since then, our congressional delegation from Maryland fought hard to have the federal government pay 100% of the infrastructure rebuild, of the bridge rebuild, as we all remember. So HJ1 is a joint resolution with the Senate to urge the U.S. Congress to create a national infrastructure bank to fund our nation's infrastructure needs, from bridges, roads, tunnels, and airports to housing, broadband, and EV charging. The U.S. is in urgent need of a comprehensive infrastructure overhaul. We score C- for infrastructure as a nation by America's own engineers, just about the worst among developed countries, significantly holding back our economic competitiveness. There are many factors that have contributed to this problem. First, in our country, unlike many other countries, state and local governments often shoulder much of the burden of infrastructure upkeep, even for those projects built by the federal government. In fact, state and local governments own more than 90% of non-defense infrastructure assets and pay about 75% of the cost of upkeep. Second, our country's infrastructure financing gap has grown so much that it is estimated at somewhere over $3 trillion. Meanwhile, the federal infrastructure investment has fallen drastically and is now at the lowest level in decades at just about 2.3% of our GDP. For context, Europe spends about 5% of its GDP on average, and then China spends about 8% of its annual GDP on infrastructure. Third, with the worsening political division at the federal level, we cannot rely on the federal government to take care of our deteriorating and failing infrastructure, which has forced the states to direct more of our resources toward infrastructure. America desperately needs a new funding structure to rebuild our country and our communities. The solution is a national infrastructure bank, which is not a new idea. Many other countries in Asia and Europe already have that. And the United States used to have that infrastructure bank under various administrations throughout the history. So you may ask, didn't the federal government just pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill a couple of years ago? Yes, but that barely addresses about 10% of the infrastructure funding needs if it goes as planned, which we know it probably won't. This is why we are asking you to pass this resolution and join about 30 other states, red and blue, and the local governments to urge the Congress to pass federal legislation to establish an NIB without having to actually fund it. Last year, Congress had a bill to create such a bank, which will be reintroduced this year with more states' support. So how does an NIB work? The NIB is a revolving fund that will initially rely on the exchange of U.S. Treasury bonds held by private investors, guaranteeing a 2% higher dividend than what they can earn on treasuries otherwise. It is expected to provide up to $5 trillion in infrastructure loans to our country's infrastructure. The funding model will have no impact on the federal deficit and does not require congressional appropriation of tax dollars. It is designed to drive economic growth by creating jobs and boosting GDP while safeguarding public resources. Under this NIB funding model, Maryland would receive up to $78 billion in new money over the next 10 years and hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now, before I turn to my expert panel to explain why we need and how it works, I want to close on a personal note. I just recently celebrated 36th anniversary of my journey to America. Back then in 1989, when I came, America was it. It was the most advanced country in the world technologically and economically, bar none. All these years later, I wonder if we have lost the will to compete. I kept hearing about the need to compete with China, but I don't see many actions to do what only governments can do. And this is one of those moments where those of us who chose America really want to see America step up to lead the world. And I hope Maryland can join the rest of the country to urge the Congress to act, because the alternative is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Are there any questions for the sponsor? Delegate, there's one in-person witness, and then we will go to your panel. Okay?
Oh, there's in-person? I thought they were all virtual.
They're all virtual, yes.
Okay.
Okay?
Great.
So, Mr. Hussein, if you could come and speak, and then we'll go to the panel.
My name is Hussein Wahid. I'm with the Initiative for Advanced Technology Acceleration with distinguished Professor Ashwini Gupta at University of Maryland, College Park. And we have been emphasizing the transformative economic efficiency that is achieved. And I appreciate what was just stated with respect to the collapse of the bridge. And there were a lot of researchers that visited Department of Transportation with the proposal to do the protective enhancement of the bridge, not once, but many times. And at that time, there were no costs involved too. But anyway, we can move forward. We have learned many things this year especially, and the value of these initiatives is much greater than before, and we have much better information. Just recently, we did a survey of some 100,000 activities within the state and found that the application of dynamical system, interactive implementation specifications and standards did enhance and has been verified and confirmed the efficiency of conducting those operations and activities. So I wanted to emphasize that the National Infrastructure Bank would facilitate these processes and these activities significantly, but at the same time, in the interim, when these things may work out or not, the utilization of these initiatives, the pilots, the guidelines, and the bills can deliver continuously whether there is funding or not, because they rely on human innovation, on citizens' activities entirely, and the proven delivery of results based on this open, totally participatory collaboration that occurs daily, and we sometimes underestimate the value.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next, we'll call up the virtual witness, Alfika Mutardi, or Malfeka? I don't know how you say it. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. My name is Alfeka Mutardi, and I am a macroeconomist. I worked for 25 years at the International Monetary Fund. Now I'm the lead economist on this National Infrastructure Bank proposal, also with the Bank Coalition Board. So we have a bill in Congress to which HJ 0001 refers, asks members of Congress to pass a bill that would create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. The reason we need this bank is we simply cannot adequately finance infrastructure either through the federal budget, state and local budgets. As we know, Maryland has had some cutbacks on its infrastructure spending due to budget constraints, nor does private sector money fill the bill. In fact, the infrastructure financing gap, as Delegate Chi has pointed out, has grown by another 30% over the last 4 years, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. This is a simple off-budget solution. It's a bank, a public bank. It is standalone. It does not require infusions from the federal budget to operate. It's capitalized with treasuries held by the private sector, and then the bank goes on to give out loans just the same as any commercial bank does. This bank can step in and fix things that budgets cannot fix. For example, topping up all the financing for the Key Bridge reconstruction, building high-speed rail from Washington, D.C. through Baltimore all the way up to Boston, fixing lead water service lines and E. coli in the water, roads, bridges, and much more. As Delegate Chi pointed out, the state could qualify for up to $78 billion over 10 years to cover all of these projects. And in addition to that, it will really supercharge American competitiveness, fix all of our infrastructure, and it's the only way forward given our budget constraints and high debt right now. So I ask you to consider positively this resolution to ask members of Congress to pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Rudy Arredondo. Are you there? You're on mute, and we also don't see you on camera. So I need to
yes, my name is Rudy Arredondo, Latino Farmers and Ranchers International founder and director. We are very supportive of this resolution HJ1. It is, in our opinion, the only way that we're going to be able to provide remediate our infrastructure and to be able to get our farmers and ranchers that we represent. We have a network of over 75,000 across the country. I live in Montgomery County. That's where our headquarters are, in Germantown. And we feel that to get it out of the uncertainty of the appropriations process in the federal government, we need to have a long-term outlook in terms of how it is that we're going to be dealing, especially in the food system, with the wildfires, the water, the flooding. We've lost a lot of cropland as a result of those crises, and we need to make sure that we are able to have resources above and beyond what's appropriated by the Congress to be able to deal with the uncertainty of our food, that we anticipate there's going to be a food shortage as a result of many factors. A lot of it has to do with the climate crisis we find ourselves in. So I would strongly request that the state legislature for the state of Maryland support and get our congressional delegation to support this resolution, HJ 1. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Angela Vullo. Angela, not Angelo, sorry.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Angela Vullo. I'm the Communications Director of the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank. I'm here to urge the committee to support HJ1, the resolution urging Congress to create a national infrastructure bank. Thank you for letting me speak today. I reside in Northern Virginia, but have spent a lot of time in Maryland and am familiar with the infrastructure needs of the state. The nation and Maryland are entering into the uncharted territory regarding the current economic conditions. Unless the equation changes, Maryland is likely to experience an extensive job loss as federal workers are laid off and whole departments of government are shuttered or moved out of state. My congressman has already warned of a recession in Northern Virginia, and the same probably holds true for Maryland. We, of course, oppose the mass layoffs and shutdowns. The National Infrastructure Bank can act immediately in the circumstance. Experts believe it will create 25 million new jobs, pay Davis-Bacon wages for construction, require talented engineers and design experts and economic analysts to orchestrate the massive increase in infrastructure projects that the bank will launch. There is a growing support for this effort nationwide. In the last session of Congress, H.R. 4052, the National Infrastructure Bank garnered 48 sponsors, including many leaders. 30 state legislatures have introduced resolutions to Congress in support of the National Bank. They are just like H.R. 1. 8 states have passed the resolutions in at least one chamber. Recently, the California Assembly passed an identical resolution. Countless city and county councils have passed resolutions. Similar hearings are being held around the country, including Georgia, California, New York City Council, Kansas City, Missouri Council, and more. The country is looking for a positive solution. This is off budget. We're at a time of high trepidation, both economically and politically, about what will work. Let's look at what worked in the past in American history. The answer is staring us in the face. Now is the time to implement it. H.R. 01.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. The last witness on this bill is Stanley Forchek.
Yes, good afternoon, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I am Stanley Forchek, and I'm with you here today virtually from New Jersey, although I spent several years in Laurel, Maryland. I am the advisory board president for the Coalition for a National Infrastructure Bank, also a retired financial infrastructure executive from Amtrak, a retired vice president of operations for an energy consulting firm based out of Philadelphia. And in most recent years, I have established my own consulting firm. Simply put, I am here to urge you to endorse the legislation for the creation of the nation's 5th National Infrastructure Bank. Overall, the nation has a lot of aging infrastructure, some of which is as old as 150 years old, as old as 150 years, plus the need for updated improvements and new developing sectors of infrastructure. Think about the infrastructure within your state. There's a major bridge highway project that needs to be rebuilt with a debate occurring on cost and the ability to fund. There's a project dealing with the B&P rail tunnels through the city of Baltimore that are well over a century old, with both Amtrak and Maryland DOT having needed this project more than 25 years ago. And Maryland, as are with many other states, is capacity short on electricity generation. This can be seen by reviewing the future PJM price projections for the next several years. The state continues to add many new end users of electricity, consider electric vehicles, transit movers, data centers, without ensuring the adding of generation facilities, plus increased generation capacity, and where it gets located will need the support of more transmission and distribution system. Maryland, along with other states, needs a long-term, no strings attached funding source.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from the committee for any of the witnesses? Is Mr. Rosen? I was told he wasn't here. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. We didn't know that. Stuart Rosenblatt, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify this morning. I urge the committee to pass the resolution. I currently live in Northern Virginia. I work with the coalition, but I lived in Baltimore County for 10 years back in the 1980s. Had a great time. I just want to briefly go through the history. This is not a new idea. It's a very American idea. There have been 4 previous institutions. The Bank of the United States was created by Alexander Hamilton, financed a lot of the early infrastructure, including the creation of a national road from the eastern shore of Maryland to Cumberland. It's now called US 40. Back in the day, it was considered the moonshot of the United States economy. The Second Bank of the United States was created in 1816 under its high point of John Quincy Adams. It started the canals, roads, and railroads, including the first commercial railroad from Baltimore City to Ellicott City. The third institution was done under Abraham Lincoln, the national banking system, and that made the United States into the greatest infrastructure and industrial economy of its time, and really fostered dams and many more railroads in Maryland and elsewhere. The final one was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, created by Herbert Hoover and then brought to a very high point by Franklin Roosevelt. It financed hundreds and thousands of projects, including in Maryland, and helped finance everything from the electrification of the Pennsylvania Railroad to Camp David, University of Maryland, Walter Reed. But the high point there was rural electrification. It electrified 3 rural counties in Maryland, including Prince George, St. Mary's, and Charles, and many others.
Thank you so much.
We'll work again.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Now, are there any questions for any witnesses? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Joint Resolution 1. Please turn to House Bill 2. Delegate Stewart.
This is House Bill 2. This is a pretty simple bill, especially compared to a few you guys have heard today. This replaces a few words in the code. There are 142 instances in the code where the word church is used, and there are 9 instances in the code where the word clergyman is used, and all this bill does is change the references to church to faith institution, and from clergyman to member of clergy. A few members of the Maryland Jewish Caucus, including the Crossfell Senator Kagan, approached me with this bill idea to correct some antiquated language in the code, presumably just because they needed a token Christian. And I will say that as a Christian, I would find it pretty strange. I don't know if I would be offended, but I would certainly be somewhat annoyed if the stand-in word for my faith was synagogue or mosque instead of church. And so this bill simply changes all those references, mostly in like the tax and zoning article, to faith institution. You may have seen in Maryland Matters that this bill got some attention on the Senate floor because they were worried about the different types of sort of weirder religions that could fall under this definition. They did some wordsmithing, and eventually the bill passed 45-1 on the Senate floor last week. The new definition of faith institution is Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, or Hindu congregation, or any other religious society, congregation, or denomination. So yeah, that's what we got. Urge favorable report.
Is the bill before us in the same form as in the Senate?
No, I've drafted some amendments with DLS to conform with the Senate version, but I don't think they're in your floor system.
Okay, we'll think about that. Thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor? Delegate Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, thank you for these corrections. And maybe the amendments address this, but what's the difference between faith institution and places of worship?
So I think that there are a couple references to place of worship that reference like a physical location, right? So like in the code where it used to say church as a physical gathering point, they put in place of worship. And in places in the code where they meant church not as it relates to a physical place where you go, they made that faith institution. I think that's the difference in the code.
So would that apply to, I know some denominations use schools for their services. Would that would that be covered under faith institution?
No, I think that to be a faith institution, you would have to be a faith institution, you have to be basically a congregation of some variety. The building itself could theoretically be a place of worship if it's used accordingly. But just because you use a school as a place of worship doesn't automatically make the school a faith institution. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But so the institution would actually be the group of people, the congregation.
Correct, exactly.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you very much, Delegate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for the sponsor? If not, we will go to the witness. Ken Phelps, Jr.
Yes, Madam Chair, it is Ken Phelps this time. Thank you. And Mr. Co-Chair. Ken Phelps, I represent the Maryland Episcopal Public Policy Network, which incorporates our diocese here in Maryland, as well as the Episcopal Church on this one, because this deeply reflects our own values and whatnot. And I can't presume, to speak for all of Christendom as I stand before you or sit before you, but Christianity does not have a monopoly on God or on faith, and we understand that. And so we encourage this change in language because it is inclusive. I'm not sure what else to say except, I could give you a world religion, tour in 30 seconds, but as I said, no one has any one, it's not a monopoly on God. I guess that's the easiest way to put it. And all expressions of faith to us are sacred and worthy. It's a spiritual thing, and everyone is guided as, no pun intended, the Spirit leads them. So again, we just, as the Episcopal Church anyway, are very much in favor of this move to be more ecumenical, more interfaith. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 2. The last bill of the day is House Bill 1381, Delegate Long.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I am Delegate Jeffrey Long, for the record, bringing to you House Bill 1381. What exactly is this weird bill that I have brought to you? So I'll give you a very brief history lesson. Of course, we know that at one point in time, Maryland used to be a colony of Great Britain. I am in front of the distinguished history professor himself, Vice Chair Holmes, but we also should know that in 1634, the General Assembly met for the first time in St. Mary City, and then in 1650, the General Assembly was separated into two chambers, which was then used the term House of Delegates. When the country was formed in 1776, it met for the first time in Annapolis on February 5th, 1777, as the Maryland House of Delegates. There are a few states that use the term delegate because, again, we were original colonies. That is Virginia, that is West Virginia, and that is Maryland, the only states that still use the term delegate. Most states currently use the term state representative, and then there are some states that use the term assembly member for the lower chamber, which is New York, New Jersey, and California. Again, they're the ones that use the term assembly member, with the exception of Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia use the term delegate, and then the rest use the term state representative. Many people during presidential election years get very confused about what a delegate is. For example, this past presidential election year, many of us and others were various delegates to conventions. Republican convention or Democratic convention. And there are voters who just frankly are not aware. They're asking, did we just elect a delegate? They don't know exactly the difference between a delegate to a political party, for a convention pledged to a candidate, or what their actual state representative, or as we call it, delegate, does. And it causes broad confusion. I'm not trying to rewrite history here, but I want us to also know that in 2022, Maryland was formerly one of the only two states whose highest judicial body was called a court of appeals rather than a Supreme Court. So what do? We put it to the voters and the 2022 general election on the ballot to change the term from Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court of Maryland. And then also this bill lastly makes technical changes because still the Constitution tends to use and refer to most constitutional officers and elected officials as men, and it makes them more gender neutral. So with that, that's your crash course history lesson, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the sponsor of this bill? Delegate Boyce.
Hi, Delegate. How do I say this? Is it that much of a burden across the country and for other folks that we are a delegate and other folks are state representatives, or I'm just asking. I think it's unique that we're delegates, and I think it lends to history, and so, but I'm here to hear you out.
Sure, to each his own. Again, there are those that are of different schools of thoughts. Some very eager, politically involved young folks from my district in Calvert County tend to research all these kind of things and like it. And so, you know, of course, I put it forth. I find it very fascinating.
It is fascinating.
I will think that when I go to different conferences and they say, they automatically assume that, you know, I'm Representative so-and-so, and I'm saying, no, I'm Delegate Long, but I guess we do the same thing essentially. So not a burden, depends on how you view the issue.
Sure.
You know, again, I just think it's good for discussion, for conversation.
Oh,
I do think perhaps there are things that we have held on to as history that have been antiquated that we can perhaps update just to bring in greater awareness and involvement. And when people are aware of who their officials are and what they actually do, they're not taking out their concerns on council members when it's a state rep's job or vice versa. And when they know who we are, the offices that we actually hold, and there's less confusion in the like, I think it just creates greater participation and civic engagement.
But just a clarification, it's more of a confusion nationally than it is locally. I mean, people in Maryland know what a delegate and a senator is.
Those who are involved.
True.
Yeah, those who are involved. There are some folks that don't know.
Those people don't know the difference between yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Delegate Peña-Melnick.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate. Do you mind if there was an amendment, if the committee was imposed to passing it to Jones House of Delegate or Jones House of Representative? As the first Black speaker, right? We have the Miller Senate building, and that was named while he was still alive. Just a thought.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for the sponsor of this bill? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 1381. I have a couple of announcements before we adjourn. I just want everybody to understand that there are other committees meeting while we're meeting, so we were not able to have a full complement here for the whole meeting, and there will continue to be multiple meetings going on. Our next meeting will be more of these bill hearings we'll be having next week, Monday afternoon, 3 to 5. Well, I'm not sure what room it'll be in, so we'll be working on that. That will be announced. And I also would like, when we adjourn, to observe a moment of silence for the speaker's son and the grief that we all feel right now.